Hi, in this video we'll talk about the ER, which is the Enhanced Entity Relation Diagram. Now there are 5 topics in this diagram: the superclass and subclass, generalization, specialization, and disjoint and overlapping constraint, total and partial, hierarchy, and lattice. So we will talk about these things, and these things what will distinguish the ER from the ERD. Okay, the first thing is the superclass and subclass. The superclass is an entity which derived from it other entities, and the other entities is the subclass. So the employee here is the superclass. The secretary, technician, engineer, manager are the subclasses. Now you need to notice that the type of the subclasses is actually the same as the type of the superclass, which means now we talk about an employee. Secretary is an employee, technician is an employee, engineer is an employee, manager is an employee. So the superclass and the subclasses should be having the same type of the same derivation. So this is the main point. Now the second main point is any attributes that the superclass have, also the subclasses will have. So the secretary will have a first name, middle name, last name, and the SSN, birth date, address. So all the subclasses share the same attributes of the superclass. This is number 2. Number 3, the subclasses themselves have special attributes which belongs only to them. So for instance, the secretary entity, the secretary subclass has a typing speed attribute. Now the technician have an attribute which belongs to the technician only, which is the T grade. Same with the engineer, which is engineer type. So these things, these subclasses also have a special attributes which belongs to each other, to each one of them. So the typing speed will not belong to the technician. The engineer type will not belong to the secretary. So these attributes are specialized only for the subclass entity. So these are the 3 things you need to notice when we talk about the superclass and the subclass. The superclass and the subclass should be of the same type, derived from them. All the attributes of the superclass also shared with the subclass entities, and each subclass have its own specialized attributes. These are the 3 things which we can say about the superclass and the subclass. Now what is the generalization and specialization? Any class which can be subclassed to other, this is called the specialization. So it's like a superclass which can be derived from it other subclasses. This is specialization. Now when you have a few classes, few entities, or when you have few entities which can be gathered, have attributes that can be gathered together, and from these attributes we can create a superclass. In this case we talk about the generalization. So basically few entities which share the same attributes, we can gather these attributes and assign them to a superclass. That is the meaning of the generalization. And as we have said, the specialization is the inverse of the generalization. The specialization is we derive from the main class, from the superclass, some other subclasses. This is the generalization and specialization. Now disjoint and overlapping. What is the disjoint and overlapping? As you can see here, the secretary do only a secretarial job. A technician only do a technician job for this entity. Same as with the engineer and the manager. So any sub-entity, any subclass that do only one job, that means these subclasses is disjoint. There is no sharing between them. One class, one entity cannot do the other work of other entities. Secretary is disjoint from technician. Secretary only do secretarial job. Technician is disjoint from the engineer. The technician only do the technician job. This is the meaning of disjoint. So each entity, each subclass do only its job. Now how we know, or how we can categorize this thing? By adding the D letter here. If we add the D letter here, that means these entities are disjoint. Each one do its only job. It doesn't share other jobs. It doesn't do other jobs. So when you see the D, that means there is a disjoint. Now what if the secretary also do a technician job, and the secretary do an engineer job, and the secretary also do a manager job? In this case, we call this an overlapping constraint. Overlapping means one entity, one subclass can do other entities' jobs. Overlapping means the technician can do and will do the secretary job, and the technician can do the manager job. In this case, there is an overlapping of job. We refer to that by the letter O. So if you see O instead of D, that means there is an overlapping between these entities, an overlapping between these subclasses. So this is the meaning of the D, disjoint, and O, overlapping. Now let's talk about the total and partial. This line, one line, refers to a total. These two lines refer to partial. Now what does that mean? When the superclass have related to the subclasses with one line, with a total line, that means we can create any number of subclasses, any number, 2, 3, 4, 5. When there is a double line, that means partial, we can create a specified number of subclasses. So when we assign a salaried employee, an hourly employee, to this employee using the double, using the partial connection, that means we can create only two subclass, only two entities, while in the total we can create any number of subclasses. That is the difference between the total and the partial. And all these things is mentioned in here. So the total, as you can see here, the participation between the superclass and its subclasses. This is the connection. If I decide to generate as many as I want of subclasses entities, then I use single line. Now for the partial, the participation between the subclasses and superclass and the subclasses, if I decide to generate specific number of subclasses, entities, then I use double line. Remember, you cannot increase the number of entities after the first decision. If you decide to have only two entities, for instance, then that's it. You may not later on increase and make three entities. This is the meaning of the total and partial. As for the hierarchy and lattice, if you could notice here, one entity belong to one superclass. One belong to one. One belong to one. This is a hierarchy. Now what if I have another entity in here, and this subclass also belong to this other entity? In this case I have a lattice, which means this entity have two, let's say, main entities, or it's like a father and child. A child here have two entities, have a mother and a father. So the child is a lattice. Why? Because the child have mother superclass and have father superclass. That's the meaning of lattice. Whereas the hierarchy, the entity has only one connection to a superclass. Only one connection to a superclass. This is the entire concept of the enhanced entity relations. Whenever you do a connection for the subclass, you just use this U kind of shape, this one, and that's it. This is the entire details, or the entire concept of the enhanced entity relation diagram.